So you've bought or you're considering buying a Siemens fridge or freezer and you're wondering what the install process is like. Well, I'm here to give you some information because it can be incredibly frustrating and I want to avoid that for you. For me, this is a community service video. It's unrelated to any of my channels, but I discovered some things doing these installs that will be incredibly useful for you. And there are some major mistakes you could make, so let's avoid them. So what we have here is the original instructions for the fridge. It doesn't really tell you where the pitfalls are, and you can follow these instructions, but they're not the best. So I found these instructions pretty intimidating. I didn't really want to start making the fridge as a result. But once I got into it, I looked at videos, no good, so let's jump into it. So these fridges and freezers are already installed, but I can talk you through the bits that were tricky. So when we look at this fridge, one of the key things here is that I've enclosed it in an IKEA method cabinet. So there are fridge cabinets specifically designed presumably for IKEA fridges. Now, the proportions of the Siemens fridge, I think, are slightly different. And what that means is where you place the bottom tray, let me just adjust your view so you can see this. Where you place the bottom shelf matters. And with the method, it's actually in a really tricky position where there's not a lot of room. The other aspect to this, as a result of that, was that there are small brackets holding this shelf in place. And when I installed the fridge the first time, those brackets, the shelf, they broke due to the weight of the fridge. Partly my fault because I was tilting it on rather than building it up and sliding it in, which I would recommend you do. And as a result from that, I had to repair that shelf, and how I did that was I placed extra pieces of material underneath in the four corners just to give that bracket more support. So rather than it just hanging off the hooks, it's got something solid underneath it. And I will put melamine coating on the front of that. The other thing that happened as a result of that initially was that the shelf was slightly out of square, and that matters later on, which I'll show you. So the key point there is that shelf needs to be level and square to the rest of the unit, otherwise it will affect how the fridge performs. And the main problem with the fridge is partly related to that and a result of that. Great fridge now that it's working, but it was painful to install. So the reason why it is painful is there is no tolerance in this. There's no forgiving of any millimeters out or mistakes. And so if we look at the hinge, if we look at this hinge, it has a certain clearance from the edge, and then down below we've got the same thing. Now obviously, if you haven't got that level and you haven't got everything square, then it's not going to be in position. And you can put shims under it and stack it up, which I have done, I think, in this instance. But this is a major issue. The lack of adjustment in this setup is amazing. If this is out by 1 or 2 millimeters, you're screwed either way. So let's take a look at just the hinge placement. And the hinge is part of the fridge. It's not part of the door, it's part of the fridge. So this hinge placement within the cabinet is important in a vertical sense. Let's take a look at why. Firstly, you can't adjust it. You can't move it in or out or back or forwards if it's in the wrong spot. It's a solidly placed hinge, which means it needs to be in the perfect spot. And if we take a look at this side of it, if we have either end of it or both ends of it, if we put it too far this side, well, we're going to get a large gap between the face and the cabinet. And we can see actually that there is a distinct difference between the IKEA cabinet with its standard hinges, which when closed is flush against the unit, and the fridge, which has this spacing. And the reason it has that spacing is when it was initially put in, using the instructions that were provided, I wasn't getting a seal at the door. What was happening there is initially I had it lower down on the shelf, so this fridge wasn't quite as high. That ended up being a good thing because when I realized I wasn't getting seal, I could actually move the shelf up and I could put a new hole. One of my pet hates is using this kind of material, these metod cabinets or any kind of cabinets like this, and constantly needing to move holes 1 or 2 millimeters, and the whole fabric of this material just disintegrates. You lose that structure. So I don't like extra holes in these cabinets. Maybe it's a perfectionist trait, but it's also a utility. If you get it slightly wrong, that's much, much worse than if you radically put a hole in a different spot. So let's talk about what had happened, the measurements that I was advised to perform using the instructions. And I'll grab a ruler. Sorry about the mess. I'm midway through renovating this kitchen. So at the moment, let's take a look at this one. So bear in mind, there's a tiny millimeter gap between the shelf and the outside edge of the cabinet where the door will shut. And what I'm doing here is I'm really assessing, can I get the door to shut and can I get the seal to effectively occur? So here we can see that the distance away is 39 millimeters. Now, according to the instructions on the sheet that I just showed you, it needs to be 41 millimeters, not centimeters, 41 millimeters off the edge. And if we look at what would happen there, okay, so in this case the fridge is further forward. Well, as a result of that, we get that small gap. You're thinking, well, why are you talking about this? Why is this important? Well, the answer is, if you do make that flush, the door will not shut. So to get that flush, you would need to move the hinge this way, which means this part of the fridge, because it's all connected, moves this way, and you get that extra 3 millimeters. 3 millimeters may not sound like much, but when it comes to this seal, and I can't show you this exactly, this seal has not got a lot of play. So you need the door to be able to hit the cabinet edge and the seal to hit the edge of the fridge to seal the fridge. Now, everything counts in this. Everything counts. Even without this handle on it, which adds another probably 1.5 or 2 mil, even without that, with that flush mounting, it was not sealing. And you can tell that because when you turn the fridge on, you get a lot of this kind of condensation, which you can see at the back at the moment, midway down the fridge. So with the fridge empty, I could see this condensation at the back wall, and I wasn't getting that feeling of suction as we shut. So we can hear it suctioning. And you can see in my fingers, there's a bit of whiteness because I'm pulling quite hard. And then I get that pop release. Now, according to the instructions, you can put a little wedge here that reduces that suction. But based on the experience I've had, I'm concerned that if I do that again, I will get lack of sealing because the tolerances are so tight. So, how would you go about this, or how would I do this again? Because these hinges are screwed into the melamine, and you're in a distinct spot, or a defined spot once you screw it in, like that's a point of no return once you screw it in, because try and move it 1 or 2 millimeters after you put a hole in, too late, you're done. I would definitely line it up. I would feel as if, am I getting a seal before I put those screws in? On the other side, there is a bracket, again, with 2 screws. I can see I haven't put the second one in, and maybe that's a good technique. So what I did with that one there is I used a clamp around the other side, clamped it into position, set up those positions. Hey, was my fridge sealing? Yes, then I can start to screw all of those into place. Again, with the instructions, depending on the thickness of your walls and how much of a gap there is here, it will, space it out a little bit to make it fit well. My other advice here is do try and get it as perfect to the top as you can, because initially, like I said, I had a little bit lower, and this funny clip thing just wasn't working very well. Now, one thing I want to mention about some of these screws and where they're located is that be careful with your drill bits. As you're screwing that in, it's very easy to hit the edge. Now, I did that with the freezer, so I'll have a look and see where it is. But again, it's one of those things. You've got a perfectly new setup, a brand new fridge, you want everything to be great. You go to screw in these holes, the drill bit hits the edge of this and you pull out a chunk. So, that's not in the instructions. User error, I suppose, but it's part of the design where the angle for the drill is very much related to hitting that particular area. So you're probably unlikely to face that scenario, but it's one of those things where, again, you've paid a lot of money for an integrated fridge. Incredibly annoying when you make a mistake like that. Now I'll come back and just finish off with, again, the spacing of the door. I talked about the 41 millimeters. Well, where does that come from and how do you work that out? Well, this clip here initially folds down. I'm not sure if I can lift it up. I have to break the seal, so I'm not going to bother doing that. But when you first install it, it's like a jig. This has spun round, it sits below here. So you move the fridge in until it hits, and then the idea is you put a screw through there and then you put the thing back on. But as I said, it's in the wrong position. And we can see that this one is proud of the edge. So it's further out than the jig suggests, which tells me that the jig that they've supplied isn't actually correct, or they're working for different tolerances. So that's one issue, which is how do you get fridge seal, which is super important. That's why you have a fridge, to keep things cold. But the other one, which is incredibly finicky and annoying, is actually the left or right of the cupboard, the door rather. So these doors, I knew I was going to put handles in, and I knew that the gap here had to be enough to handle the gap between the handles. And then I've got other cupboards coming in here, so I know that has to be in the right spot. Again, not a lot of space to work with, so how do you line up the door? Well, there is a kind of panel that's sitting behind here, and then that panel is screwed into the door, and then you turn these nuts to get it up or down. But the point here is it has no left or right play. The only left or right play you have is with the bracket that's mounted to the door. The holes, instead of being circular, allow for 2 millimeters total movement. So you can move 1 millimeter one way or 1 millimeter the other way. So my point here is you definitely want to line up the door exactly where you want it according to that bracket. And if you don't do that, you will find that you're either too tight or too far away. The other aspect of that is, well, how high or how far from the top do you put the bracket? And again, I manually measured that in relation to where the fridge was, where these units are. So the way this works is they have a nut on top of a screw. You can turn both of those things to elongate that to lift up this so that you can lift the door. So it has some play, but obviously you can't go down further than the fridge itself, and you can't go too high with that. So you have probably, in a good way, you probably have 20 millimeters or 15 millimeters of play up and down that you have via these devices, whereas left to right, you've only got 1 or 2 mil. And then back and forth, you've only got 1 or 2 mil. The other aspect of this, up and down, left to right, is initially when you position the door, the hooks will, you actually have to tighten these nuts reasonably, otherwise the door will fall off because it will just slide off the back. You can see it's just sort of held on a little bit by this tab. So and when you do that, you need to screw the nut in to get it lined up. So you might place it and think, yep, it's in the right spot, but then when you do the nuts up, it's going to move left or right. It's going to want to sit in only one spot, left or right, with those nuts. So once that is done, and you'll have to open it from the top, because if you try and pull from the side, the door will pull up and pull off. Once you've done that, once you've lined that all up, you have one shot